It is the early morning of August 338 BC. After months of stalemate, two armies met on the fields nearby the Greek town of Chaeronea. The plain of Chaeronea was a vast expanse of verdant fields. In the distance, the slopes of the hills rose up, their rocky peaks jutting out from the earth like jagged teeth of some great beast. The air was filled with the sound of birdsong, and the sweet scent of grass and wildflowers hung heavy on the breeze. As the armies prepared for battle, the earth itself seemed to tremble with anticipation, as if the very land itself knew that this day would be the day of great triumph or terrible loss. What was about to happen was a clash of titans determining the fate of the ancient world. On one side deployed the Kingdom of Macedon's army, commanded by King Philip II and his talented 18-year-old son Alexander. They faced an army composed of multiple Greek city-states, among them Athens and Thebes, determined to preserve their freedom and their way of life. As the Macedonian king gave the order for his soldiers to advance, the Athenian hoplites braced themselves for impact. The battle was about to break out, and its results would shake the foundations of the world. For centuries, the Greek city-states dominated regional politics. The most influential were Sparta, Athens, and a recently emerging influential power, Thebes. In the second half of the 4th century BC, Greece looked back on a period of cluttered and confusing wars and truces. At the epic 371 Battle of Leuktra, Thebes decisively crushed the Spartan military hegemony. But neither Thebes nor its ally Athens managed to profit from Sparta's loss of power. Instead, the Greek city-states bled themselves dry, literally and financially, waging wars amongst themselves. Most citizens and politicians longed for a general peace, but distrust among the ruling elite prevented anything resembling peace from being established. To the north of all this turmoil, an unassuming kingdom existed. Macedon was looked down on by its southerly neighbors. City-states did not consider their inhabitants part of their advanced culture. They believed Macedon lacked culturally, politically, and socially, which perhaps it did in many respects. In 359 BC, King Philip of Macedon ascended to the throne, succeeding his father. He immediately found himself in a difficult situation, but would prove to be an ambitious and steadfast king. Brutal court politics forced him to deal with domestic turmoil initially. Surrounded by powerful neighbors, eager to take advantage of the weak kingdom, Philip managed to hold himself surprisingly well. He consolidated his position of power in court and issued many military and administrative reforms. The military reforms were modeled after the famous Theban army, where he spent his time in his 20s. He established the Macedonian phalanx, soldiers armed with a 13 to 20-foot pike called a sarissa. The sarissa became a crucial weapon for the Macedonian military success, and it allowed them to create a dense formation of soldiers that was very effective in battle. He redesigned the phalanx's armor. Whereas hoplites were burdened with weight, the phalanx was light-armored and thus more mobile and flexible. One of his first military successes was the conquest of Thrace, a wealthy province. He also launched expeditions against Thessaly, Illyria, and Epirus. His military skill and the success of his reforms definitely showed their success. Philip managed to conquer or at least pacify the hostile powers around his kingdom thanks to the gold mined in the Thracian mines, which allowed him to levy new recruits. Another factor that contributed to Philip's rise was his ability to form alliances and make strategic marriages. He married several important women, including the Illyrian princess Audata and the Thracian princess Olympias, who was the mother of his son, Alexander. These marriages helped to secure alliances with other kingdoms and further strengthened Philip II's position. But Philip's ambitions worried other city-states, especially the Athenian orator Demosthenes ensured constant Athenian opposition to Macedonia's ambitions. Over a decade of energetic diplomacy and warfare followed. Athens and Macedon both gained and lost allies constantly. All the while, Athens' budget wasn't generous enough to maintain a well-trained professional army. They were in a difficult spot. In 356 BC, the Third Sacred War broke out. Phocis, supported by Macedon, faced the Amphictyonic League. The war was rough on all parties involved, lasting a decade, and by its end, Philip cunningly used the exhaustion among all parties to seize Thessaly and large parts of Phocis. He stationed a garrison in Nicaea, and his conquest granted him a seat on the Amphictyotic Council, an organization composed of representatives of several city-states. This religious and political body, and the conflict between the city-state of Amphissa and Athens regarding farming on sacred land, stood at the center of worsening relations. When Amphician farmers decided to cultivate so-called sacred land, Athens argued a fourth sacred war ought to be declared against the city-state for this sacrilege. The subsequent events are muddy and uncertain. What is known is that in 339 BC, the Thebans expelled the Macedonian garrison stationed at Nicaea. Multiple council meetings were held with political infighting, intrigues, abstaining of voting, and the trading of goodwill. Athenian troops blocked the mountain passes, and its leaders continued to attempt to convince many city-states to join their side against Macedon. Despite the fragile peace being established after the Third Sacred War, tensions remained high, especially between Athens and Macedon. But despite high tensions and not necessarily intending to wage war against Greece directly, Philip did want to continue expanding his territory. Philip focused on the northeast, and after laying siege to Byzantium, he launched an expedition against the Scythians. But as a holding force remained laying siege to Byzantium, he learned of Athens concluding an alliance with the city. This was one step too far. During the campaign against the Scythians, Philip was severely wounded, but he began preparing an invasion of Greece regardless. He used the Amphician troubles as a pretext for his invasion. He formally declared war against Athens, which prompted the city-state to prepare for an imminent Macedonian invasion. Because his garrison at Nicaea was removed, and Athenians and Thebans held the passages into Greece, he had to find another route. Seizure of part of Phocis' territory turned out to be perfect for this. For months, Philip laid low, allowing his enemies to suspect he had abandoned his plans to invade altogether. Most of the details of this campaign continued to be shrouded in mystery. Although the Macedonian army likely fought occasional skirmishes, Philip kept a close look on the movements of his allies. They were becoming complacent, not believing that Philip would actually invade Greece anymore. It had been months. Then one night, as guards nearby Amphissa let down their guard, he forced his phalanx on a bold night march. At Amphissa, his army defeated a surprised Greek mercenary army. He occupied the city and used it as a military base for the remainder of his campaign. Meanwhile, Athens energetically tried to convince other city-states of the imminent danger. After a powerful speech by Demosthenes, Thebes chose to ally themselves with Athens. Having exhausted all diplomatic options, Philip collected his army and marched towards the passes near Chaeronea to meet his foes in battle. The Greek troops, a collection of hoplites from several city-states, positioned themselves among the mountain range nearby Chaeronea. There were several commanders. The most noteworthy were Chares, commanding the Athenians, and Theagenes, commanding the Thebans. The allied troops marshaled around 36,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry, positioned in an oblique line, with their flanks snugly protected by a river and hills. 12,000 Theban hoplites and 800 cavalry manned the right flank. To their right stood the Sacred Band, Thebes' elite soldiers. The band comprised of 150 male couples based on the philosophy that a soldier would fight to the death and prevent dishonor when his lover was by his side. They already proved their worth during the Battle of Leuctra, where they defeated a Spartan army. The left flank consisted of 10,000 Athenian hoplites and 600 cavalry, commanded by Chares. Light infantry covered the gap between the army and Chaeronea. And finally, some 5,000 mercenaries and soldiers from other provinces manned the Greek center. King Philip of Macedonia commanded around 30,000 infantry and 2,000 cavalry. He positioned himself on the army's right flank. Here he commanded the Hypaspists, so-called shield-bearers. These elite units were typically armed with a long spear and a short sword, and they were trained to fight in tightly knit formation. They were considered some of the best soldiers in the Macedonian army. The renowned Macedon phalanx manned the center. Both armies deployed across each other. The front extended around 2 miles. A frontal attack against the Greek positions would be very dangerous, so the king sent one last envoy in an attempt to open peace negotiations. But despite the Oracle of Delphi predicting to the Greeks that the battle would end badly for them, Demosthenes overruled anyone who considered peace with Macedon. Because Thebes stood to be sacked first upon victory, and their recently acquired renowned military reputation, Philip figured they would be the fiercest combatants. Their army was well trained, whereas the Athenians hadn't fought a significant land battle in 2 decades. Its army consisted of citizen volunteers. The Athenian flank would undoubtedly be the weakest. The king reasoned the best way to crush the spirit of an army was to defeat its strongest flank. So contrary to what might reasonably be expected, Philip decided to concentrate against a strong Theban flank. Defeating the sacred band would be the winning move and undoubtedly demolish the army's morale. Tasked with this crucial responsibility was Philip's 18-year-old son, Alexander. He commanded the Macedonian cavalry. His young age and the incredible military responsibility bestowed on him reveal how skilled he was and how much his father trusted him. The Macedonians opened the battle. They advanced against the Greek lines in an oblique order formation. Philip's flank marched ahead of the remainder of the army, slightly outflanking the Greek left flank. His Hypaspists were the first to clash in battle with the Athenians. The noise of combat, swords clattering and men screaming emerged from the side of the battlefield, while the remainder of the Macedonian army was still refused. During the fighting, the Athenians drifted slightly to the left. Athenian commanders on the left flank motivated their soldiers to continue their fight and push against the Macedonians. This appeared successful, as the Hypaspists gradually lost ground. The Athenians pushed them back onto a slight incline. With a battle cry, the Athenians pushed even harder. They were winning the battle. But around the center, a different situation developed. Thanks to the left flank's advance, a gap emerged between the Athenians and the remainder of the army. The Thebans had not moved an inch, disciplined as ever, but the emerging gap proved ideal for the Macedonians. Alexander led one division of his cavalry into the gap, while his other division flanked the Thebans on the other side. Just like that, the Thebans and the sacred band were surrounded entirely. Seeing the success on the other side, Philip roused his men and ordered them to charge forward with all they had. Thanks to the slight slope, momentum carried them against the Athenians. These were pushed back, tripping over other soldiers or themselves. The Macedonian advance was brutal, breaking the Athenian flank. Many soldiers surrendered or fled the battlefield. The Macedonian phalanx in the center fighting the Greek mercenaries to emerge victorious. The sight of the surrounded Thebans and fleeing Athenians was enough to cause that line to break and flee the battlefield. Of the Thebans, only the sacred band continued fighting their hopeless battle. They were surrounded, and they fought largely to the death. Of the 346 members of the sacred band survived, the rest were slain. As the dust settled on the battlefield, the Macedonian soldiers set about looting the dead and tending to their wounded. The bodies of the fallen Greeks were left to rot in the sun, a grim reminder of the futility of resistance to the Macedonian might. Philip's Macedonians killed around 1,000 Athenians and took 2,000 prisoners. The remainder escaped, including Demosthenes. Among the Thebans, the casualty numbers were similar. The Macedonians reportedly lost only 140, although these numbers have to be taken with a pinch of salt. In the days and weeks that followed, the news of the Macedonian victory spread throughout Greece, causing fear and panic among the people. Those city-states that had opposed Philip and Alexander now had little choice but to submit to their rule, lest they suffer the same fate as those at Chaeronea. But in the battle's aftermath, Philip was surprisingly hospitable as a victor. Prisoners were freed, and his son Alexander traveled to Athens to discuss peace terms. Philip's only demand was he become a supreme commander against Persia. Delighted at the favorable proposed terms, Athens agreed immediately. The once proud city-states of Greece were forced to bend the knee to a new master. Philip then forced the Greek city-states into the League of Corinth, which was a virtual subjugation to his rule. But he dared to dream further. He wanted to unite the Hellenic world and launch a war against Persia. Historians consider Philip's conquest of Greece a watershed moment in Greek and world history. From here on out, there would be no more independent city-states, but kingdoms would dominate the Greek world. But the cities continued to exist throughout the ages, and their soldiers continued to make their mark on history. Philip's conquest laid the groundwork for his son Alexander. The young prince showed his military skill and proved himself a formidable warrior and leader. With his keen intellect, fierce determination, and unwavering courage, he would lead his father's kingdom on a series of epic conquests that would shake the foundations of the ancient world. Thank you very much for watching this video. If there's a topic, battle, person, or event you would like to know more about, let me know your thoughts in a comment. I would also really like to thank all my patrons and my channel members for their generous support. If you enjoy House of History and you want to support my work, consider joining me on Patreon. For just $1 a month, you already gain early access to all my videos without any in-video advertisements. Don't forget to subscribe. See you next time.